Hey, what's good everyone? Welcome back to the channel. I know in our previous video we talked about budget Master Classic team compositions using one legendary Pokemon and a Meltan box, but how about today's video where we have 0 legendary Pokemon along with the Meltan? So this is going to be a take on the Dragonite Double Steel comp that we were very familiar with in Master Premier, except that I've taken the Magnezone out and put a Melmetal in its place instead. And I felt like this was a pretty accessible team because in the previous month we've had a Beldum Instance Day to be able to build a Metagross, and then this past week we've had a Dratini Spotlight Hour to be able to build a Dragonite. So combined together with the power of Pokemon Home and the Meltan boxes, this team should be a very accessible team that you two can replicate to get into Master Classic for the very first time. In terms of IVs here, I have been grinding for a while, so I do have the Hundo Dragonite as well as the Hundo Metagross. However, I will say the most important IVs to have on either of those Pokemon is the 15 attack. So 15 attack on the Dragonite allows you to win CMP, or at least coin flip CMP, against enemy Dragonites, and then 15 attack on the Metagross. If we ever have Premier back at the level 40 level, you do need the 15 attack and the Best Buddy to be able to hit a Bullet Punch breakpoint against enemy Dragonites. But overall, try to get the best IVs that you can possibly get. And then for the Meltan, of course, we have a lot of opportunities to grind these Meltan boxes. I just went with the best IV that I had, which in this case was a 15, 15, 14. And overall, I will remind you guys that this team doesn't really dominate the meta, but it is one that can compete in the current environment because the power of Dragonite against Giratina Origin and the 2 primal Pokemon, it's just so strong that it cannot be overlooked. And backed up with the 2 steel types, I think Metagross is actually very underrated in the Master Classic meta. So let's get into some sample battles here. I did one set on stream the other night, and I'm going to go over those matches. All right, so getting into our first match against Keiru 825. Going to be leading a, a little bit of video problem there. I'm going to be leading a Dragonite into the Melmetal. So unfortunately for this team, we didn't get off to a very good start in this set because Melmetal is one of the hardest walls to Dragonite, and there's really not much that Dragonite can do. So here I'm going to decide to safe swap into my Metagross over here, and maybe in the future I should be swapping into the Melmetal instead because we definitely know that we're going to be drawing out a Giratina Origin form. And here, kind of thinking about the situation and how I'm going to play this out, and because the Melmetal versus Dragonite matchup is so dominating, I actually make a decision here to try to fight for switch advantage if I could, or at least come out with a huge energy advantage. So here, I know that this is probably going to be a Shadow Ball from the Giratina Origin, so I am going to shield this up. And I'm going to try to race to the next Meteor match as quickly as I can, but unfortunately Giratina Origin just paces a little bit too quickly, and even if I know this is an Ominous Wind, at this point, with the health range that Giratina Origin is at, I'm going to decide to shield this up and Bullet Punch all the way down. So right now, I know this looks like a really terrible situation, and honestly, it is. But to be honest, I'd rather have switch advantage and try to gamble that he has maybe a Groudon in the back that the Dragonite can handle, as opposed to being in the situation where I'm going to have the Dragonite lined up against Melmetal anyways. So I'm going to hope that my opponent brings in the 3rd Pokemon here so I can at least try to isolate the matchup right there. And I can see the Mewtwo coming in, and unfortunately this is going to be a really bad situation for us because Mewtwo does carry Focus Blast, and having that Melmetal in the back, it's probably not going to have too much work to be done. So I'm going to try to fire off both of these Meteor matches to get the shields down situation, and then I'm going to aggressively swap into my Melmetal here in order to not get farmed down. So unfortunately here I'm counting the Psycho Cuts, and I know that my opponent is probably going to outpace me to the Focus Blast, but got to take all the risks that I can. So bring in the Melmetal here, try to get to that Rock Slide to deal as much damage as I can, but unfortunately Mewtwo's attack stat is very high and it's going to CMP. I know that this is a 9 Psycho Cut energy move, and I'm expecting nothing short from my opponent than to have the Focus Blast. So boom, we are going to go down, and going to make the most efficient play here in this scenario and actually top left, because there's no way that we could have won here. We had a double hard counter in the back to our Dragonite, and unfortunately there's no way to win this game. So you are definitely going to run into those situations in GBL, whether you're playing a budget team or an expensive team with the triple legendaries. It just kind of happens. So let's move on to the next match. Okay, so getting into our second match of the set, we're going up against Simmons Elka Sniper, and we're going to be leading a Dragonite into a Zekrom. So this is a very interesting matchup because actually, as it turns out, Dragonite can win in all even shield scenarios. With the Hundo Dragonite that I have here, it has just a little bit more HP than the Zekrom, which means that in the straight Dragon Breath Down War and any kind of shielding scenarios that are even, Dragonite is going to be able to win this. So this is pretty good for me because my backline is actually kind of weak to Zekrom. Zekrom has access to Crunch, and it resists bullet punches, so Metagross may not be the best Pokemon to line up against it. And Zekrom actually has a pretty decent matchup against Melmetal as well. So I'm going to make the decision here that I'm going to stay in here, as this is the perceived threat to my steals in the back. And as you can see here, not only does Dragonite outpace Zekrom to the charge moves, 6 seconds to a Dragon Claw versus the 7.5 seconds to the Crunch. My opponent is going to match shields here, or I'm going to match shields to my opponent here, and we're going to be able to Dragon Breath straight down. So based on the simulations here, if you do not drop any fast moves on Dragon Breath, you should end the matchup at about 1 or 2 HP. So you can see right here, Dragon Breathing down, and we're getting very close, but because I know the matchup already, I know that I can end this matchup with just a sliver of health. So you can see how close that was. So any kind of lag there definitely would have swung the matchup against us. And here, I'm looking at my top right to see what my opponent's going to bring in, and I'm clicking on the Metagross because I know that the hard counter to Dragonite's going to come in to farm it down, and my opponent brings in a Rhyperior. So this is kind of a bad situation, right? So we have 2 Pokemon that we've seen so far, a Zekrom and a Rhyperior, both that can do very well against our backline. So actually swapping into Metagross here worked out really well for us because the bullet punches are going to deal a little bit of super effective damage to this Rhyperior, but again, Mud Slap is a very high damaging fast move here. And I'm going to make the decision here to let it go because I have 2 redundant steel types here. So if I can get a shield here with the Meteor Mash, that's actually going to open up the venue for my Melmetal to come in and be able to superpower this Rhyperior down. So here my opponent is going to shield here and going to get Mud Slap down, but the Rhyperior is now in a manageable health level, and that means that my Melmetal can come in with the shield advantage and be able to superpower this down just to see what's in the back. So here my opponent makes a great play here. He actually overfarms a little bit so that he can CMP me to the superpower, but actually kind of works out in my favor because I don't want this Rhyperior to dip. So opponent's going to go for Surf here. We hit the CMP on the superpower, and that's going to be able to feint the Rhyperior. So Rhyperior, despite being a pretty good steel counter, doesn't resist superpower, right? So I'm gonna look for the last Pokemon to come in, and it's actually a Dialga. So this actually works out perfectly for us. And I make a mistake here because I should have just swapped my Dragonite here. I have a Dragon Claw stored, and I could have swapped my Dragonite immediately to throw the Dragon Claw first. That way, when my Melmetal comes back, it's not debuff. But again, in the heat of the situation, I know that this Dialga here needs a Draco Meteor to be able to KO my Melmetal. So what I'm gonna do here is get to 9 Thundershocks here. Swap to my Dragonite real quick, hit the Dragon Claw. This is kind of an unnecessary charge move because I know that 2 superpowers will KO the Dialga anyways, but having the debuff reset over here and having that energy available means that this Dialga that needs 11 seconds to get to Draco Meteor, he's never going to reach it. So here, go for 1 superpower, and then I'm going to have access immediately and 1 Thundershock here to the 2nd superpower, and we actually wind up taking this match despite having a Rhyperior in the back to be able to counter both Metagross and Melmetal at the same time. So GG's to my opponent there. That was a very close one, and could not have expected a Rhyperior in the back, but that might be another budget option that we also explore. Our third battle of the set is going up against Always Adam 22, and here we're going to be leading Dragonite into a Kyogre. So Kyogre does very well against our backline steals once again, but if you want to see a Kyogre, this is where you want to see it against Dragonite. As long as the Kyogre doesn't reach a Blizzard, the Dragonite should be in a pretty good spot here because you're going to be taking neutral damage from that Thunder and also resisting the Surfs here, and this is a pretty dominating matchup for Dragonite, so I'm expecting my opponent to swap out. And he brings in a Mamoswine. So this is a pretty spicy pick. I really like this, and I kind of want to do a feature on Mamoswine as well because I feel like it does have play in the Master Classic meta. But I'm going to counter swap here into my Metagross here, and if you guys remember the matchup from Master Premier, Metagross is going to be able to bullet punch down the Mamoswine in the one-shot scenario regardless of whether it can land a Bulldoze or not. So going to play this matchup out methodically just like the Master Premier times, and expecting my opponent just to go straight for the Bulldoze here, which is not a problem. Going to throw the Meteor Mash first just to get the shield advantage, and then after that, going to take whatever damage I can from the Mamoswine because I don't want the Kyogre to farm too much when it comes back into play because at this point my opponent is probably thinking that the win condition is Blizzard on Kyogre onto my Dragonite. So here, take the Bulldoze here. It's a terrible move, right? And we're resisting the Powder Snow, so we can easily use 1 shield here, farm down, come out with a Meteor Mash for the next Pokemon, and not give my opponent any farm here for the Kyogre. So gonna bullet punch all the way down, and expecting the Kyogre to come back in, but my opponent actually brings back in a Dialga. So because that steel typing does resist the Dragon Breaths, gonna hit the Earthquake right before, and does my opponent know that there's an Earthquake coming his way, or was he counting? So let's find out and see. And nope, my opponent was apparently not counting right here, and that Dialga Earthquake on Metagross is still very, very strong despite not having stab, and my opponent is going to basically have a useless Dialga here, and before I can switch in my Pokemon here, my opponent actually goes for the surrender. So you can see here, Metagross being very, very strong with that energy advantage. It's the same thing as Master Premier is. If you have a Metagross running wild, I don't think any Pokemon really wants to come into it, and had my opponent brought in the Kyogre right there, we would have still had the Melmetal in the back to take care of the Dialga. And for our fourth match of the set, we're going up against Furchungno, and we're going to be leading the Dragonite into another unfavorable lead against Dialga. So like I said, from the first battle of the series, Dragonite into Melmetal, really bad. Dragonite into Dialga, just about as bad. So here I'm forced again to safe swap into one of my steals here. Gonna bring in the Metagross here because I know that Melmetal can handle the Dialga in the back, and my opponent brings out a Giratina altered form. So here in this case, it's actually not as bad because Metagross against the Giratina Origin is pretty rough, but the altered form doesn't hit as hard, and even the Shadow Sneaks here are not going to deal too much damage. So my goal here is to try to get a shield advantage going into the mid game here. And here my opponent does use the Shadow Sneak here, and I'm going to try to outpace it if I can to the next Meteor Mash. And we're going to be able to win CMP. So this is actually really huge for us. And I'm expecting a shield from my opponent here because he wants to maintain alignment. And this is probably a signal that I should have picked up on, but my opponent lets this go. So at this point, I should have realized that the Giratina Altered was actually the only thing that my Dragonite could line up against, because this match, although it feels favorable right now with the switch advantage and even shields, it's going to feel really bad here in a moment. So here I'm really happy. I'm going to bring in my Melmetal, right? So I'm going to wait the switch timer out, and then I'm going to bring in the Melmetal to start superpowering away. But had I actually thought about it a little bit, would have realized that there's potentially going to be a Togekiss in the back. So the only reason that my opponent would stay in Dialga versus Melmetal is that if he has something even weaker in the back. So probably should have shielded this up, the Iron Head, because the only thing that matters in the Togekiss versus Melmetal matchup is the health, right? So going to farm up to a lot of superpowers over here, and didn't actually expect my opponent to shield the first one, but at this point, right as my opponent shields the first superpower, the alarm bells start going off in my head, and I go, oh my god, I think that he has a Togekiss in the back, but it's a little bit too late. I'm actually committed to this, so I'm going to try to KO this Dialga as quickly as possible, and then one of my win conditions potentially is to have Dragonite come back out and Hurricane the Togekiss. So here, going to go for the first superpower, going to go for the second one, but unfortunately my opponent has a charge move and I have to burn his shield. So this is a very, very bad situation right now, and had I thought about it, if I wanted to replay this match over again, probably would have swapped out right now to the Dragonite, because I need to lure out that Togekiss, right? Like, Melmetal is the MVP here, and unfortunately in this case, the health is just a little bit too low. My opponent takes the damage, brings in the Togekiss, and unfortunately in this case, if he just shields the Hurricane here, he should have a very clear path to victory. So I'm going to try my very, very best to get to the Hurricane here, and expecting a show from my opponent, but he actually throws energy right before we get there. So this is very unfortunate, and I have to let this go because we're just a little bit too far off of the health to get to that Hurricane, and unfortunately I'm going to be able to reach a Rock Slide here, but man, those charms are just really chunking right now, and I let a charm through with poor fast move timing right there. So gonna throw the Rock Slide here. My opponent is of course gonna shield, and right before I can get there, he's gonna be able to KO me. So really well played by my opponent here. The team composition was of course not favorable for the Dragonite overall, because as soon as the Giratina Altered comes in against the Metagross, Dragonite really has nowhere to go. So needed to really pick up on the signals a lot earlier and maybe protect my Melmetal at the very end. So once again, in that particular situation, the next time I will know based on the team comp right there. All right, and the last battle of the set is against Baravi Kali, and we're going to see if we can salvage the set and make it a positive one. So here, I'm going to lead Dragonite, and I run into a Groudon, and this is one of the most one-sided matchups in all of Master Classic. Dragonite can actually Dragon Breath down Groudon regardless of what charge moves it throws, assuming even energy and even shields. And this is a very favorable situation for me. So here I see the Best Buddy icon on the Groudon here. So not expecting a Dialga in the back, but let's see what he switches into. And my opponent is going to bring in a Mewtwo. So going to meet that with the Metagross here. So just in case this Mewtwo is going to try to go for Psy Strike baits here, Metagross is going to be able to double resist that with the Psychic and the Steel typing. But kind of have a feeling here that my opponent might be going for a Focus Blast, so I'm going to shield this up, and my opponent does. So this is kind of good for me because having the Mewtwo waste energy and not bait is actually more favorable for me because I know that my Dragonite has a good matchup. All I need to do is make sure that the matchup in the back is secured, Melmetal versus whatever the third Pokemon is. So here I'm just going to go straight Meteor Mash, of course, and you can see those bullet punches are actually just chunking away, and make a little bit of a mistake here, CMPing with the Mewtwo here, or maybe my opponent was actually counting, so really good job by him, but he goes for another Focus Blast, and right now, if I shield 2 Focus Blasts in this matchup, I'm going to be able to guarantee switch advantage. So this is very, very good for me, maintaining the alignment of the Dragonite onto the Groudon, and my opponent lets that go, brings back in the Groudon, and I know that right now have a very favorable situation for me, and even then my opponent's actually just going to throw Fire Punches, so going to be able to damage this Groudon very heavily with the Meteor Mash because I'm not expecting my opponent to shield here, and we're going to reach the Meteor Mash here in just 1 Bullet Punch. And this does a substantial amount of damage to Groudon overall. So Metagross here actually acting like a mini Dialga in this matchup, so that's very nice. And my opponent actually swaps out into his own Dialga, a non-Best Buddy Dialga, with the Best Buddy Groudon. So kind of a strange decision here, was definitely not expecting it. Maybe it's a tactic that is used to throw people off, but my opponent's going to throw here. I'm going to let him throw here first because I don't want to debuff myself and take a Draco Meteor. And as soon as he throws the Draco Meteor, I know that the next charge move is at minimum going to take 8.5 seconds, which means that I'm going to be able to fire off 3 superpowers and secure the match. So here, going to go for the first superpower here, expecting to get that shield from Dialga. And my opponent actually is going to let this go, so that does a ton of damage, which now means that I've secured the match, right? Because no matter what the shielding scenario here is, my opponent is definitely going to be walled by this Dragonite in the back by his Groudon, and then as long as Melmetal can get 2 superpowers off, this is going to be able to end the match. So here, my opponent is still Dragon Breathing away. He's not going to reach another charge move. Melmetal will reach the 3rd superpower in time. And then locked in right now, but going to let the Groudon farm my Melmetal down because I know that no combination of charge moves and energy is going to KO my Dragonite from full health. And you know, a valiant effort by my opponent here to stay in and try to deal some damage, but I know that I can just Dragon Breath all the way down. You can see here Earthquake does very minimal damage, and going to end the match here with a very healthy Dragonite and Metagross pulling the weight inside the mid game. Alright, so as you can see, this is the set right after the set from the previous video, so we were able to go up 15 points with a 3-2 set at 29.65, and overall, felt like this team was a pretty fun one to play. And again, this may not be the best team to climb with, but if you're looking to get into Master Classic for the very first time, taking advantage of all these recent events and the Meltan box creates a pretty solid team, right? So Dragonite and Metagross were very OP in Master Premier, and actually, as it turns out, even compared up to the legendaries here in Master Classic, Dragonite and Metagross can make a very, very good comeback. So I highly encourage you, if you have these Pokemon, give Master Classic a shot here with these 3 Pokemon, and I think you're going to see pretty solid results here despite your ELO level. So once again, thank you for watching the video, and if you like this content, feel free to comment, like, subscribe, share with your friends, and I will see you in the next video.